Episode 4 of Andor is here. Coming off of last week's rather enjoyable premiere, I was really looking forward to this week's episode, and it did not disappoint by any means. The writing and character work continues to be top tier. There wasn't a single blaster fired in the entire 45-minute plus episode, but I was hooked the entire time. So much so that with the way it ended, teasing what's to come next week, I didn't want it to stop.
I want more.
We finally found out how the series will begin to bring in the bigger players in the early days of the rebellion, as well as the larger Imperial machine. Not to mention, the Easter eggs were plentiful. Whether it was some background props or the mention of familiar planets, if you were paying attention, you more than likely picked up on some. One scene in particular was an absolute buffet of Easter eggs. You'll love to see it. But even if you didn't pick up on any, that's okay. We got you. That being said, heavy spoilers are ahead for episode 1 through 4 of Andor. If you're not caught up, come back to this video afterwards. If you have seen it or don't care, however, you're in the right place, my friend. Let's go ahead and get into this, Red Squadron. Last week left us with Cassian Andor taking off with Luthen Rael after escaping Deputy Inspector Cyril Karn and his Preox Marlona security forces. Just to clarify from last week, these guys are not the Empire. They're a much smaller police force funded by the Empire, but not important enough to get stormtroopers. This week we open with Cassian aboard Luthen's ship. Luthen blasts into hyperspace, the inside of his cockpit resembling that of the Millennium Falcon. Cassian asks what exactly is powering the ship, to which Luthen brushes it off. Our best guess, though, is probably kyber crystals, especially with a moment that comes later in the episode. Luthen tells Cassian to quit bleeding on his floor, and Cassian starts to bandage up his wounds from the shootout on Ferrix. We find out they're heading to Aldhani, a planet we are unfamiliar with, but learn a fair amount about later. Luthen gives Cassian two choices. He'll drop him off somewhere and Cassian can take off, or he can take on an important mission of taking something from the Empire. Cassian mentions that he fought in a battle on Mimban when he was 16 years old. We know the planet from Solo, A Star Wars Story. Han Solo is stationed here at one point, and it's even where he met Chewbacca. Could Cassian and Han Solo have fought alongside each other way back then? We also know that this was when Cassian was 16, so that would put him around 22 or 23 years old in Andor. Cassian mentioned that on Mimban, the Empire had he and his men unknowingly fighting each other, which Luthen says is one more reason why he should hate the Empire. Luthen then drops the line, quote, "No matter what you tell me or tell yourself, you'll ultimately die fighting these bastards." Of course, we know that he does just that in Rogue One. He tells Andor that he didn't risk his life for the Starpath unit in episode 3, he actually came for Cassian. We finally get a few details of the mission. It's 5 days, big reward, but a lot of danger. There's a team and a good plan. If Cassian delivers, Luthen will pay him 200,000 credits. What exactly will they be stealing? The quarterly payroll of an entire Imperial site. Now we cut to elsewhere in the galaxy, that being Coruscant. For the first time in live action since Revenge of the Sith, Coruscant is my personal favorite planet in the entire franchise. The prequel nostalgia is real. We head to the Imperial Security Bureau, where several ISB agents are meeting. We primarily focus on Dedra Meero, who was featured a lot in the trailers. The ISB agents are talking about things that are going on in their various jurisdictions. We hear about a few familiar Star Wars planets. Ryloth is mentioned, a planet featured heavily in Star Wars The Clone Wars. They talk about an Arvala 6. We don't know about Arvala 6, but Arvala 7 is featured in Season 1 of The Mandalorian. That's where Queel lives, and where Mando first finds Grogu. We also hear about construction on Scarif, the planet from Rogue One's final act. Could the construction be for the base there? Maybe even the Death Star? Although I believe it was mostly built on Geonosis. Dedra takes an interest when another agent starts talking about the stolen Starpath unit. Switching gears over to Aldhani with Luthen and Cassian again, Cassian shaves his beard, looking much more like he did in Rogue One, but also closer to his mugshot than Cyril had. Kinda backwards if you ask me. Luthen tells him to choose a name for the mission. He goes with Clem, the name of his adoptive father. Luthen then gives Clem, a down payment, that being a kyber crystal worth 50,000 credits. Could this have once belonged to a Jedi we're familiar with, whom Luthen was friends with pre-Order 66? Luthen says he wants it back after the mission, and that the crystal came from the Rakatan invasion. That's a crazy legend story of these amphibious force-sensitive beings from the unknown regions. Luthen heads outside to meet the mission's leader, Vel Sartha, and convince her to take Clem on just 3 days before their planned operation. Reluctantly and with little to no choice, she accepts. Luthen does say that since they're paying him, he is, however, expendable. Some foreshadowing, perhaps? We now head back to Morlana 1 for the first time this episode. One of the ISB agents from the meeting is there with Cyril, his supervisor, and his second-in-command. The agent says that the Empire is taking proper control of their operation, meaning stormtroopers and the whole shebang, as opposed to these sad space cops. Back on Aldhani, Cassian/Clem and Vel are making their way to their camp and bickering when we hear a familiar roar. The two duck down and a pair of TIE fighters come soaring by on patrol. We return to Coruscant, where Dedra is examining the files on the Starpath once again. It turns out it was from one of her bases, and she just wants jurisdiction. I feel like if her and Cyril met, they'll be the best of friends. They both seem like they really want to move up in the Imperial machine. Luthen also arrives on the planet, his ship on autopilot, as he begins a transformation. Luthen goes from a gritty and rough rebel recruiter to putting on a wig, gown, and jewelry, his demeanor changing just as much as his appearance. It's pretty clear this is his cover-up persona. Clem and Vel continue their journey, and we learn a bit more about the planet. The Empire has been there a while, there are very few inhabitants now, and it's a perfect distribution location for the regime. Dedra continues to try to get jurisdiction over this Starpath unit without any success. Clem and Vera walk past a horizon with two moons, almost mirroring the twin suns of Tatooine. They arrive at the camp, and we meet other members of the team. They name drop Saw Gerrera, who we know will be in the show at some point. He was featured in Rogue One and appeared in many animated shows. One of these guys are holding what looks to be a straight up AK-47, which strikes me as a bit odd. Maybe this is actually going to be a slug thrower that projects a bullet rather than a blast of energy. Something to watch for next week. It could just be a design choice. The entire group is just as apprehensive about Clem as Vera was at first. Back on Coruscant, in what now looks like a space airport, Cyril arrives. He heads to an apartment and meets his mom, who greets him with a slap in the face. I'm not sure where his character is going now, maybe the ISB or Imperial Academy. Cassian gets his wounds patched up more, and the rest of the team argue about his inclusion and whether they can trust him. We now head to Luthen on Coruscant, who seems to sell rare collectibles as his false occupation, showing off some items to Mon Mothma, who makes her return from the original trilogy and several other appearances since. We know she's a major player in the early days of the rebellion. And oh boy, did I mention Luthen's gallery is full of Easter eggs. We see some chrome Mandalorian Beskar armor. It looks just like Din Djarin's, but obviously he's like 15-ish at this time and probably doesn't even have his Durasteel armor yet from season 1. Maybe this is left over from the Great Mandalorian Purge. There's also some armor that looks just like Galen Merrick's, aka Starkiller from the Force Unleashed video games. Voice actor Sam Witwer even acknowledged it on Twitter. There's a Kalikori similar to Harrison Dula's from Rebels. It's a sacred family item. Parts of the door from the World Between Worlds can also be seen. Rebels fans are really eating good this week. Indiana Jones's whip can be seen frozen in carbonite, a nice nod to Harrison Ford's other biggest film role. There's what looks to be a Gungan energy shield from the Battle of Naboo in The Phantom Menace. On top of a shelf, there seems to be both a Sith and Jedi holocron, but they do look awfully oversized, and I feel like the Empire definitely would have confiscated all of these. We have what looks to be a Wookiee warrior's helmet and a Kashyyyk Clarion. There was even a TV spot that showed off a mask that looks an awful lot like Plo Koon's, or at least another Keldor's. However, I didn't see it in the actual episode, maybe I missed it or it was actually cut. Luthen shows off an Utapauan weapon. That's the planet where Obi-Wan fought Grievous on in Revenge of the Sith. There were some early leaks for Andor which pointed to us possibly going there at some point, so hopefully that happens, but we'll have to watch out for it. Anyways, on the plot side of things, Mon and Luthen sneak into the back room and get uber serious. Mothma wants to bring someone else into their inner circle, but just who could that be? My money is definitely on Senator Bail Organa. We know how important he also was from the beginning of the rebellion, and he did just appear in Kenobi. Mothma mentions that the Empire is starting to get more and more suspicious. She says there are spies everywhere. They may only be able to stay this hidden for a bit longer. Back with Cassian now, another member of the crew arrives. He pulls up on a speeder bike, which looks and sounds exactly like the bikes featured on Andor in Return of the Jedi. This guy is wearing a full-blown Imperial uniform and is clearly their inside man. He also isn't very pleased about Clem joining in on the mission so late. Mon Mothma arrives back home, and this is very important, guys. Bonsai trees are canon in Star Wars. Mothma talks to her husband, who has invited some guests over for a meal, some that she's not super thrilled about. On the invite list is Ars Dangor, who we think is this guy in Return of the Jedi, and Sly Moore. So 2 of Emperor Palpatine's closest pals. That's gotta be way worse than any sort of meal with the in-laws. Clem and the crew, that sounds like a horrible boy band, start to plan their attack, and we learn a lot more about their mission. They will be up against an entire garrison first of all. They plan on breaking into a vault, stealing the crates of payroll, and loading it onto a ship to escape out of a runway tunnel. However, that is essentially a death wish, as Cassian points out. They will have TIE fighters on them in a matter of minutes, 9 to be exact.
Never tell me the odds.
But it's not like those odds will ever stop Andor. Their only hope is that the Empire will not be expecting it because, well, no one would be stupid enough to try it, except for them. They point out this small temple on the map. It reminds me of the Seeing Stone that Grogu was brought to in Season 2 of The Mandalorian, when he called out to the Jedi. Maybe this was a former Jedi temple too. The significance of the temple, however, is that natives would gather at it to observe a special celestial event called the Eye of Aldani. It's essentially a crystal meteor shower.
Ooh, meteor shower.
And could provide their one escape route from those TIE fighters just before the eye closes. That is going to be such a beautiful visual. Back at the ISB, where we debate the case of the stolen star path and who has what jurisdiction, Dedra pretty much gets shut down by her superior and told to finish her quarterly report. To close out the episode, the crew is eating around the fire, Cassian is given a data pad and told to get familiar, to which he sarcastically replies,
Can I eat my food?
he has to get familiarized with everything by the morning. Wow, what an episode. I did not want that to end. I sung the praises of the premiere last week, but this was even better. Gritty character-driven story sets the larger narrative in motion. Next week is going to be eventful. We have so much to look forward to. The action we're going to get with Cassian and the crew attempting the heist is going to be crazy, not to mention the visuals of a TIE fighter chase under a crystal meteor shower. Surely something is probably going to go wrong to further the plot. Maybe Cassian gets captured, who knows. Where do you think the direction is going for next week in episode 5? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe and catch our breakdown each and every week until the finale. Until next time guys, Red 5 standing by.